Hello hockey fans, and welcome back to another video. Being chosen at the NHL entry draft is a big achievement in any player's career. Whether they were picked first overall or selected in one of the later rounds, there is no greater joy for a teenage hockey player than hearing their name called at the podium, meeting the front office staff or the franchise owners, and putting on their new team's jersey for the very first time. Over its 57-year lifespan, the draft has gone through its fair share of changes. From raising the age of eligibility from 16 to 18 years old, adding more rounds to the draft so more players can be selected, to the ability to use draft picks as tradable assets before the pick is made, the yearly event has developed and adapted as the league has changed with the times. Though thousands of players have been drafted into the league over the last half a century, no player was ever selected before this guy. This is the story of Garry Monahan, the first draft pick in NHL history. In order to tell this historic tale, allow me to take you back to June 5th, 1963, during the NHL's first amateur draft. The Montreal Canadiens, who finished the prior 62-63 NHL season at third place in the league, were able to get their hands on the first pick in the draft after the teams that finished below them in the league standings that year, Boston, New York and Detroit, elected to take the second, third and fourth picks instead. With that first overall draft pick, the Canadiens decided to select 16-year-old forward Garry Monahan from the St. Michael's Buzzers. Before the amateur draft came into existence, the only way that players were able to get their foot in the NHL's door was by playing for a minor league or junior team that was sponsored by an NHL franchise. So when this inaugural draft was held, many draft picks that day, including Monahan, had never heard of an NHL draft before, didn't know that it was taking place, as it was held secretly in Montreal behind closed doors, nor did they find out that they had been selected in that draft until several days after the event. Interestingly, Monahan wasn't considering a long-term career in hockey before being drafted, having tried out for St. Michael's Bantam team just to see if he could make it, and being seen by both his coaching staff and himself as a third liner at best, especially since he was playing against guys 2 years older than him. So when the Monahan family received a call from Montreal Canadiens general manager Sam Pollock, it was pretty unexpected. Garry's father even asked if Pollock was actually talking about Garry's 18-year-old brother, Patrick Monahan, who was considered the better hockey player between the two, and who Garry had tagged along with on his teams over the last few years. Pollock assured him that Garry was indeed their man, so Garry Monahan was now officially a member of the Montreal Canadiens and the first draft pick in NHL history. Following his selection, Monahan would spend the next 3 seasons with the Peterborough Petes of the Ontario Hockey Association, where he struggled to light the league on fire with only 44 points in 101 games during his first 2 seasons, before a breakout 84-point year during the 66-67 season. This impressive final year in the juniors would earn Monahan a chance to join the Canadiens roster for the start of the 67-68 NHL season, where he would make the cut out of training camp and take to the ice in his NHL debut on October 18, 1967 against the New York Rangers. The former first overall pick would play 11 games with the Habs and go scoreless in that span, before being sent down to the Houston Apollos of the Central Professional Hockey League for the rest of the season. Monahan would get another shot at a full-time spot on the Habs roster early into the following 68-69 season, but once again he would struggle to be an effective player at the NHL level, as he played just 3 games with Montreal and failed to register a single point. This lackluster production prompted Montreal to reassign Monahan to the AHL's Cleveland Barons for the rest of the year, where the 23-year-old had a much better showing by potting 44 points in 70 regular season games and 2 points in 5 playoff games. After playing 14 games with the Habs over the last 2 seasons, and having been unable to score a single point in that span, on June 6, 1969, it was announced that Montreal had traded Monahan, along with defenseman Doug Piper, to the Detroit Red Wings, in exchange for Bart Crashley and Pete Mahovlich, the second overall pick after Monahan in the league's first amateur draft. This acquisition by the Red Wings was exactly what Monahan needed to jumpstart his NHL career, as he was able to book his place on Detroit's roster out of training camp and suit up in his first full NHL season. Despite a more permanent spot on the team though, the Canadian forward would continue to have limited success on the scoresheet, with just 7 points in the first 51 games of the season, before it was announced on February 20th, 1970 that Monahan had been traded again, this time to the Los Angeles Kings in a 6-player deal. Monahan then spent the rest of the 69-70 season with the Kings and scored 3 points in 21 games, before being traded during the off-season to the Toronto Maple Leafs on September 3rd, 1970. Monahan's move back across the Canadian border would work wonders for his rather fledgling career up until this point, as the forward would find a home for himself in Toronto for quite some time. Monahan would spend the next 4 seasons of his career with the Maple Leafs and become a more productive player on the scoresheet, scoring 30 points or more in 3 of his 4 seasons, en route to notching 124 points in 312 games with the original 6 franchise. However, on October 16, 1974, just 1 game into the 74-75 season, Monahan was traded for the 4th time in his career, this time to the Vancouver Canucks. Monahan then spent the next 4 seasons of his career with Vancouver and had the most productive stint in his entire NHL career, continuing to play a similar role and score at a similar pace compared to his time in Toronto. Monahan notched 30 points or more in 3 of his 4 seasons, and even recorded a career-high 44-point year in 76-77 for a total of 140 points in 287 games as a Canuck. Then, on September 13th, 1978, Monahan would be returning to a familiar franchise, as he was traded for the 5th and final time of his career back to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for cash. Monahan would play 1 more season with Toronto and score 11 points in 62 games, before deciding to call it a day on his NHL career and leave the league for good at the conclusion of the 78-79 season, finishing his 12-year NHL career with 116 goals and 285 points in 748 regular season games, as well as 4 points in 22 playoff games. Though he had just retired from the NHL, Monahan wasn't completely done playing hockey just yet. Rather than play out the final years of his career in the minors or in Europe, Monahan decided to take his talents to Asia in order to suit up for Seibu Tetsudo of the Japanese Ice Hockey League. The Canadian forward ended up playing 3 seasons with the Japanese side and scored 92 points in 60 games, before hanging up his skates for good in 1982 at the ripe old age of 35. Since his retirement, Monahan has enjoyed his extra time away from the rink, as he seems to have moved on to the next chapter of his life away from hockey. He did serve as a colour commentator and a studio analyst for Vancouver Canucks games between 1987 and 1990, but other than that, he's kept himself a pretty comfortable distance away from the game, at least at the NHL level anyway. Though he may not have had the highest potential, or been the most successful player to ever suit up in the league, thanks to his team not being sponsored by an NHL franchise, Garry Monahan holds a pretty unique place in the NHL's history books. Whether you think that he should have scored more points, or lived up to the potential that comes with being a first overall pick, more so than he actually did during his career, Monahan holds a historic milestone that is his and his alone, and nobody can take that away from him, even if they tried. And besides, you don't get to play parts of 12 years in the best league in the world if you're a terrible hockey player now, do you? Not a bad career for a projected third liner who had no plans to play pro hockey, eh folks? And that's the story of the first draft pick in NHL history. What do you guys think about Garry Monahan's career? Was it good, bad, or do you think he should have continued playing in Japan for longer? Let me know in the comments below, I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching, guys, I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye! A big thank you to Antti Hannanen, Chris Gadsby, Connor B, Paul Mallia, Jordan Whitehead and Martin Tolness, as well as a huge thank you to Max Artis for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.